morning, Steve. I certainly hope that you are well. Thank you so much for joining us on the second episode of Practice This, 5 Tips for Playing the Tuba. How are you today?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me on, Jerome. I appreciate it.
I should give you a proper introduction. Today we have Steve Dombrowski, who is the Principal Tubist of the Colorado Symphony in Denver, Colorado, and is also the professor of tuba and euphonium. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yep, that's right.
At Colorado State University, correct?
That's right. Yeah, Fort Collins.
Okay, Fort Collins. Wonderful.
Yeah.
I haven't really spent a lot of time. I've been to Denver once, but I haven't really spent a lot of time in Colorado. But at any rate, we're certainly glad to have you today. Why don't we start with what you do now? Can you tell us about your position with the Colorado Symphony and what you do at Colorado State University? I think a lot of people assume that they know what a principal tuba player does, and a lot of people assume what tuba instructors and euphonium instructors do, but maybe we don't know as much as we think.
Well, I think everyone has a pretty good idea. I've been with the orchestra now for 15 years, and we pretty much play a different concert every weekend. It's whether it's a masterwork series or a pop series or different stuff. There's always something new on my stand, and it's kind of fun to have a wide mix of repertoire to have to learn, to sometimes learn on the fly and sight read as you go. And it's always a change. It's always something, I should say always something fun, but that's not always the case. But there's always something different. And the teaching up in Fort Collins. So I live in just south of Denver, and Fort Collins is about an hour north of Denver, so it's a long drive up there. But for the last 7 years, I've been teaching up at CSU, and basically there, it's maintaining a tuba and euphonium studio, teaching the students, running a studio class, making sure everyone has what they need, and kind of guiding them through the repertoire and guiding them to their career choices, whether that's going to be a band director or going to go off to try to get a performing job somewhere. So,
how many students do you have?
Well, that varies. There's 1 year I had up to about 13, and my lowest was 3 my first year I started, but I try to keep it around 8 or 9.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
So with the job with Colorado Symphony, do you do a lot of chamber playing?
There's a brass quintet that we use. I actually once did a bass clarinet and tuba duet, which was kind of fun.
Wow.
The focus is the onstage orchestral playing, but we do use a quintet every once in a while. And it's honestly, I like quintet playing a lot. It's, you share a fifth of a load, which is a lot more than you normally get to do. So I kind of like that instead of just sitting around waiting for your next whole note.
Well, you mentioned that there's always something new on your stand. So is it that the orchestra really goes through the expansive classical repertoire, or are you guys doing a lot of commissions?
No, so what we do is we do, I think, 21 classical or masterworks concerts, traditional. And we may have a commission once or twice, but we do quite a bit of, like standard, orchestral rep and some new stuff, and depending on what the conductor wants to put on, really. But our pop series is where we get a lot of new stuff. We do a lot of work out at Red Rocks Amphitheater, which is a gorgeous place, and I think we're very lucky to have that as an option for summertime playing. But with that, we do a lot of work with rock bands or performing artists, something like that, and that's where a lot of our new stuff comes in. Sometimes, even after the rehearsal, we'll get a new chart on our stand for their concert, and just, here you go. They're not overly difficult, thankfully, but it is, you have to keep a little bit of sight reading work in your repertoire, just so that you're able to handle what's coming at you. So.
Excellent. That's kind of been my experience too, that often the pops music for tuba can be a lot more challenging. I don't know if it's just because we know the classical stuff a lot better, but it
That
definitely feels
that
like
may
it's
be.
more.
That may be. I mean, I've spent a long time working up my orchestral excerpts and learning how to play, what I do in the orchestra. And some of the pop stuff, or particularly for me, the jazz charts are just hard. They're really, they're really different, and that's the challenge for me. Yeah.
Well, let's touch on that a little bit. Let's talk about your training. First of all, I'm sure you've told this story many times, but it's always fun for me to hear. How did you start on the tuba?
All right. So it sounds like a fake story, but I started in fifth grade on a trumpet, and I was, decent. It was fine. I didn't hate the trumpet the way I do now. I'll just say that. I'm kidding, by the way. But so we had a Memorial Day assembly in middle school, and I remember sitting on the gym floor trying to peek up at the band playing whatever they were playing, and I just saw the big shiny thing in the back. And I went to my band director and I said, "Hey, what's that big shiny thing?" He said, "Oh, that's a tuba." It's like, "Well, I want to play that." And at the time, I was about this tall. The tuba was this tall, so it was, he was a little reluctant. We'll put it that way, to let me play the thing. So he gave me a mouthpiece and said, "All right, buzz this thing, and we'll see if you can do it." And away I went off from there. Had the thing sitting, on my lap as I played like this for the first 2 years I played, but then I sprouted a little bit, and so it fit a little better. But it sounds like a fake story, but that's actually how it went.
Well, what's incredibly interesting to me is that as I've gone throughout my career meeting various professional tubists all over the world, um, so many started on another instrument and then were promoted to tuba.
Yeah.
So it's always a good story. Now you're from, is it Shrewsbury, Massachusetts? Is that
I'm
right?
from a little town. It's called Shrewsbury, Massachusetts, next to Worcester, which is about 45 minutes from Boston. So I grew up a New England kid. And the first experience I had with orchestral music was we took a field trip to see the Boston Pops play. And the bus driver got lost and we ended up late. So we walked in to Symphony Hall in Boston as the orchestra was already playing. It was John Williams playing one of his tunes, maybe, Great as a Lost Ark or something like that. And I remember walking into the hall and having this explosion of sound hit me, and just realizing how incredible it was to be in that scenario, in that situation. And that's kind of one of the first things that I remember about hearing an orchestra live. Of course, I've seen them on TV, because they used to play the Boston Pops on TV in Massachusetts. And but the experience of walking into the hall and having the sound just hit you I'll never forget that.
It is truly an amazing sounding hall. One of the best in the world, really quite phenomenal. Do you remember who was playing tuba? Was it Chester Smiths or maybe Gary Ofenloch?
Well, that was Chester Smiths, and shortly after that I got to go to that concert, my band director, who was a trumpet player, took me to see Chester in between one of his Christmas concerts. So here I was, this little tiny kid with my 3/4 B-flat tuba, chugging into Symphony Hall, peeking on stage with all the Christmas garlands and lights and stuff. And here comes Chester, and I get to play a little bit for him and meet him, and that was a really cool moment too. And it was one of those first times where I looked at someone and he picked up my tuba and played some ridiculous lip slur stuff, and I just, that was my expression. And just, are you kidding me? On my little tuba, I can make that sound like that, really? Yeah, he was a great guy to go see, and I was very thankful, I think, that I was able to at least grab a few lessons with him over the course of my time I was in high school and stuff like that. So that was, you know, little things for me made a big difference.
That's super cool. So did you have a regular private teacher?
I did. Yeah, he was a grad student, one of Chester's students, who lived, you know, a couple towns over from me, and he was great. His name was Rob Orr, which in Boston was funny because everyone loved Bobby Orr from the Bruins.
Right.
So yeah, I took lessons with Bobby Orr, and everyone was like, "Really?" Lessons, not yeah. So yeah. So I did. I went to see him regularly, but he encouraged me to, as I do to everyone else, to go take lessons with everyone possible. So I, you know, as much as my parents could afford, like we would go and see as many different people and take lessons. So it was.
Wow. So, and you ended up at Boston University for undergrad, correct?
I ended up, it being another kind of interesting story. So I was in the youth orchestra, the Boston Youth Symphony Orchestra, and we had a concert. We were playing pictures at an exhibition. And here I was, this kind of senior in high school, you know, shaking like crazy as I played Beatlo, and completely train wreck. I mean, it was not a pleasant sight. But I get a phone call a couple days later from Gary Ofenloch, who said, "Hey, I heard your concert with the youth orchestra," and immediately I think I went pale as I was talking to him on the phone, like, "Oh God, you heard that?" And he said, "Why don't you come and audition for me at BU?" I mean, it hadn't really been on my radar because, I mean, it's an expensive school to go to, and I just hadn't thought about it. So I put my application in, and I went to go play, and wouldn't you know, that's where I ended up going to school. So, you know, through messing up Beadlo my very first time, I got into college.
Sometimes you have to let them know that maybe, you know, they can actually help you. So
yeah, absolutely. And it was a good learning experience for me too. Like, it doesn't always have to be perfect in order to get some kind of a point across. So
I think what a lot of people probably would be interested in knowing is that Boston has always been a place where there have been many fantastic tuba players around town. And even at Boston University, they've had a lot of fantastic tuba faculty members. And during the time that you were there, you were working with Gary Ofenloch as well as Toby Hanks. Is that right?
well, so my first year, and there were consistently 3 tuba teachers, although I mean it depended on who studied with who. But I went in with Gary Ofenloch, and at the same time, John Manning and Charlie Villarubia were on faculty, and they would run masterclass every once in a while, and you know, I just get to see them down in the practice room area, which was really kind of a treat. Then Gary went back to the Utah Symphony after my first year, and that's when they brought in Toby Hanks. They would fly him in from New York one day a week to teach. I mean, there were 3 of us at the time, so it wasn't like a really long day for him, but that was really cool. And when Gary left, I was anxious, of course, and he left saying, "No, you're going to have one of the best teachers out there." And yeah, I mean, I learned a lot from Toby. What a great musician he was. A character. He would bring his guitar, and he would sit on the floor of the studio singing Willie Nelson songs as I walked in the door. You know, he just had a completely wonderful attitude about music, and it was you know, infectious. I learned so much about music from him, so much about tuba playing, breathing, everything. So that was, yeah, I mean, leaving, you know, Gary leaving in essence was not a great thing, but it certainly worked out very well. So
cool. I highly encourage anybody watching this video to check out Toby Hanks on his album Tuba Sampler.
yeah,
If you listen to John Stevens' quartet, I think it's Dances,
yeah, I think
and
that's
Toby Hanks is playing the first tuba part. It is unreal, unbelievable. The entire album is incredible, but that's one of my favorite. That quartet is one of my favorite recordings. I think John Stevens is playing in the quartet.
yeah.
Great. So moving right along, And I actually, before we get to Indiana University, I do want to ask you my experience at Boston University. I definitely remember very well walking from the College of Fine Arts all the way down Commonwealth to the Sci Center
Yep.
for orchestra rehearsals. And I remember there was one time when I was playing euphonium as well in wind ensemble. So I was walking down with a tuba, a euphonium, and a mute. I think I'm pretty sure it's at least a half a mile, maybe three-quarters of a mile
Yeah.
down Commonwealth. Did you have that experience as well?
Oh yeah, two tubas, a mute sometimes. Yeah, I mean it was a bit of a circus, you know, watching us walk down to rehearsal or concert or something like that. And God forbid you try to get on the tee, because it was just not going to happen.
Bill's character, right?
A little bit, and a little bit of muscle strength too.
So moving along to another institution that you and I have in common, certainly Indiana.
Yeah, I went to
University.
Indiana after Boston. I went to Indiana, and you know, I think that was a perfect move for me. Honestly, it was a great spot for me to be at that point in my life. And you know, there was nothing I could say. Mr. P knew exactly what he was talking about, and I came in knowing I was going to do exactly what he said, and I had trust that it was going to, you know, that along with the work that I put in would help me get to where I wanted to be, which was in an orchestra, and came in with that mindset, and you know, the studio was wonderful. The tuba basement was a pit, as it still is now, but we loved it just the same. And it was a great community, a lot of great players, and we all pushed each other to do things that I think we heard each other doing, and that, of course, pushed me to say, how did you do that? And it was a great working atmosphere, just a great environment in general. And because there wasn't much else to do in Bloomington, we just practiced, you know, which there was the mentality of, okay, practice right now because someone else is doing it somewhere, and, you know, you want to get the job before they do.
Right. It's really amazing that time in your life, undergrad, grad school, you're never going to have that type of time or really resources to practice. You may feel like you're broke, but you have the facilities, you have the positive feedback from the teacher, and you have colleagues that push you.
Yeah, the classmates, the colleagues, they're a big part of what makes IU what it is, honestly.
Right.
You know, you still get an hour or two with Mr. P, but you're constantly around everybody else. Yeah, now I have 3 kids and 2 jobs and a house to take care of, and you know, yes, I play a lot, you know, when I'm on stage and when rehearsals, and also teaching my lessons, I like to play. But it's not even remotely similar to how focused you're able to be when you're in college. It's just different, you know. So, you know, when my kids were born, I was lucky to get a half-hour practice in. So, you know, my priorities kind of changed a little bit, as well as the focus of what I had to work on. But I couldn't just sit down and play for 4 hours at a time, which I loved to do. Now I'm not even sure I could do that.
Well, we're definitely going to get into that here in just a second. Before we do that, I wanted to ask you, did you win your job in Colorado when you were still a student at Indiana?
I did, yeah. It was probably the last audition that I could have won before I had to take summer classes. So, yeah, I won that in June of 2005, right? Yeah, or July, something like that. So it's been about coming up to 15 years here. So,
wow, that's incredible. I remember when you won the position. I think I was in Chicago at the time, and Richard White was saying, "Yeah, man, there's this fantastic tuba player at IU, and in fact, he just won Colorado." And I was thinking, "Wow!" And I can't remember when we first met. It was probably at a conference or maybe another audition.
You were a fellow at Tanglewood, and I was man, I don't know if I was doing the high school program or if I was just there for hanging out or just listening to concerts or something like that. But I remember meeting you then. Yeah.
Oh, cool. All right.
Yep.
So, in addition to this video being a historical document of me having hair, because let's face it, at some point I won't. You remember when I had a young man's hairline, so.
Look, I'm just thankful it's not great right now.
Wow. Okay. Keeping that in mind, let's move on to the main portion of the video today, which I'm really excited about. And you've already talked about practicing, training, how practice needs and the ability to find time to practice certainly changes as we progress through different stages of our lives. So when you look at your career and you look at what maybe you do now, what you did in previous years for your training, what would you say would be the 5 things that you recommend that you've done that contributes mostly to your success?
Well, I mean, the first thing is thinking about things musically. That was one thing that I got ingrained for me from Toby Hanks forever. I mean, that was every lesson with him was, how are you going to play this musically? Because at the end of the day, I mean, we are playing music and I want to enjoy what I'm listening to and enjoy what I'm playing to. So that's the first thing. That's the biggest approach. And, you know, that was a lot of my focus. And my focus in the lessons, even with Mr. P, were never really quite on like the real basic fundamentals. And so what I do when I practice now is I actually focus on the fundamentals a lot. And, you know, so that I think is probably a lot of, you know, these 5 things are all basically fundamental driven. So, you know, I'm going to start with buzzing on my mouthpiece because it was the one thing that no one ever encouraged me to do. I mean, I should say that differently. I'm sure my teachers encouraged me to do it and I just didn't listen. There's probably that. But I mean, as a result, I never quite did a lot of it until I got in my job with the orchestra. And I would hear my horn player colleagues doing unbelievable things, buzzing on their mouthpieces. And I said, wow, that's really cool. And so I, you know, would pick up my mouthpiece and try to buzz and I would get nothing, you know? And from that, I started to embark upon, okay, well, if I can make this better, I'm going to have, maybe it won't do an awful lot for my sound, but it'll make things easier. And once my kids came around and my practice time went and took a nosedive, I found that to be really, really crucial to keeping myself healthy and not getting injured while I'm doing my job or just hanging around playing. So what I picked out a few things that I like to do on the mouthpiece. Of course, buzzing anything is great. But from Roger Bobo's book, he's got a mouthpiece exercise that's basically like a modified stamp study. That's the one. So, you know, from his book, he's got this mouthpiece study, which is, I mean, essentially it's a stamp book exercise that you just play on your mouthpiece. So, you know, I just will give myself a note to start off, and then and go through the whole thing that way. The fun part is the last line, and this is what drove me insane for a long time because I never really listened to the advice about buzzing, is going down into the pedal range. So give yourself a note again. You know, and buzzing those notes was impossible for a very long time. and you know, over a course of time, I got used to how it felt and how it was supposed to work. And you know, so that was probably the main thing that I first started to do when my practice time took a dive, in order to kind of keep things to where I could do anything that was put on my stand. That's always been my goal, is to keep myself at a place where whatever comes my way, I'm able to actually do.
So as far as buzzing goes, there are two things that come to my mind, which is that it seems to be a little bit controversial. You have some people that say it still seems like it's a small minority of people who are saying that buzzing isn't really like playing, so you don't need to buzz the mouthpiece. What's your response to that?
Yeah, I've never really loved that thought process, particularly now after having buzzed quite a bit more. I definitely see the relationship, and honestly, when you buzz, your tone, and then come back to the instrument, your tone is almost instantly better. The sound has more color, it's got more overtone, it's better, because you've got things flapping and things working. And the other part is, if you struggle with range, or if you struggle with your tone in the range or something like that, buzzing is probably one of the best things you can do to help fix that. If you can keep your sound on the mouthpiece more open throughout the different ranges, instead of letting it pinch up top, right? You still get the pitch out, but it doesn't sound quite as nice. And if you can figure out through buzzing how to keep your sound consistent throughout the different ranges, then obviously it translates into the horn.
How did you develop the buzzing really, really low? Because that's where my students struggle, especially with beginners. You can't really get to a low B flat.
Yeah, I describe it, my students will laugh. I describe it as flappage. So you have to have enough flappage in the mouthpiece in order to get the notes to come out. And it's just, for me, it was trial and error, knowing that I kind of have the Arnold Jacobs in the back of my head saying, you want the result, you want the sound, you want, this, so don't necessarily worry at first about how it works, just go for the sound. And that is how I first started to get mouthpiece, down in the low range to work. And then you figure out, okay, here's where the shift happens, and here's where I open up, and here's the pressure, and here's the airflow, and those things come once you figure out how to, you're not going to hit a home run unless you first swing the bat. So.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I think that certainly makes a lot of sense, and that's been my experience too. Just kind of do it until it happens and keep the result in mind. So the first thing is buzzing.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the first things that, and it seems strange for me to make that my first thing because I never did it.
Oh.
But now, after having done it for so long now, it was probably, at least 6 or 7 years that I started this. I'm almost ashamed to say that, but it's really become something that I found really useful, and not the most useful tool out there, but boy, something that I really recommend all my students to do. So, yeah.
Fantastic. What about number 2?
So, these aren't really in any particular order, but number 2, I think flexibility is another thing we all struggle with. Certainly, I hear it in a lot of my students. I hear it in myself, and so I like to put a lot of exercises in. Again, just basic fundamental things that will, once you learn the technique, you apply it into whatever piece you're playing, and it makes your job that much easier. So there are a couple things that I like to do. I worked a lot with this with Toby Hanks. He was very into doing some basic Caruso exercises as well as some Remington exercises. And because he was kind of, he didn't play tuba at that point, he wrote out a bunch of just basic Remington exercises on one sheet of page, one piece of paper. And, they were really, really basic. But he said, if you can kind of master the basic stuff, you can expand on it further down. So really the idea is to just start easy. That's, and make sure you get things right. Yeah, so this is the sheet that he drew out just his kind of highlights out of the Remington book. And his deal was you start easy and then work your way up. Of course, that makes complete sense. So if you take the top line, you go all the way down through valve combos and stuff, just making sure that you have the sound even between the two notes, and that there's no stoppage of sound or error in between them. And then you work your way all through, increasing speed, increasing range, that kind of thing. So what is this one? Let's look at number 3. What is that? 3B. So just an example of that. The idea is that if you get the idea about flexibility down first, the speed can increase pretty effortlessly. And so the Remington book's great. The violin book is really good too for those flexibility exercises. But he also paired it with some Caruso exercises, and I've now seen this YouTube series by Julie Landsman, which is fantastic. She goes over all this Carmine Caruso method, and I never did it that in depth, but I certainly worked on quite a bit of it in terms of just getting some embouchure structure down. But in terms of flexibility, Toby shared this with Chester Smits. Chester would call this continuous air. Toby didn't have a name for it. He just would, who it was. And basically he said, in order to get things to really move and be flexible, your chops also have to be flexible. So if you were to take, and now I've transferred it to my mouthpiece too, if you were to take and do a harmonic series on the mouthpiece, you would get like a trombone bliss. And essentially that's what your chops are going to do during this flexibility exercise, any one of them. So he would have me start just a regular harmonic series and bend the pitch so that it sounds pretty nasty. It's not meant to sound nice. We're, especially as band players, we're trained to really lock pitches in so that everyone else can fit their sound in on top. And it creates a lot of kind of rigidity in your chops so that when you move between notes, you get a nice little thud or a huff in between them. And if you're able to get rid of that and just have your chops be fluid, then the flexibility will really happen effortlessly. So the thing he would have me do, and like I said, Chester called this continuous air. He would have me just do a regular harmonic series, but bend the pitch between all the notes, almost aiming for more goop than actual note. So you would go. Like I said, doesn't sound very good at all, but it kind of trains your chops that there are notes between the notes, so it's not just there's actually more connection between all these open notes, so that when you move between them, it can happen really, really fast and smooth. Only by keeping your chops from being rigid and by, at least showing them that you can bend the pitch between them, between these breaks. That was, part of his flexibility thing. And I actually find that I warm up doing this stuff just to make sure that I have things moving, and that if I see something where I need to be smooth between the notes, I'll be able to do it.
Wow.
So that's quite a bit of what I do for flexibility. I mean, the violin book is great. There's some stuff in the Arvin book that's really cool too. But that's, basically, I spent a long time with Toby, kind of harping on, getting those, steps or huffs out of my playing. So.
Wow, fantastic. I think that flexibility is something that brass players try to incorporate into their playing, but it's great to hear you explain the benefits of it beyond just the brass players Olympics, which is
Right.
something I've always kind of felt. I felt like brass players practice that kind of stuff sometimes to impress each other before the rehearsal or concert starts,
Yeah.
but it definitely has benefits.
I'm sure there's part of that, but the whole Caruso method is, I mean, it's a calisthenics, really, is what he calls it, and they're really exercises meant to help your playing, not really, you don't focus on them as you're playing, so you work on these exercises over time in order to strengthen yourself so that you have everything available to you. The story goes, I guess, is that people would go when they were having problems, and they would go to him, and he was Mr. Fix-It. So he developed this method kind of as a tool to prevent some problems that he was seeing people come in with. So
let's actually talk about Caruso for a minute, if you don't mind, because
sure.
I've certainly watched Julie Landsman's series on Caruso many, many times, and it's something that I've tried to incorporate with my students. So I want to bring up what you sent me.
So, I mean, like I said, Toby was really big on this because, I mean, he had issues with his chops and he stopped playing. So he was very cognizant of what went wrong for him and how to prevent that in others. And a lot of the Caruso stuff is kind of modified through him. And I ended up writing everything down so I didn't forget it. And starting these things off is really, it's hard, it's tough, it's kind of just very taxing on you. And so the first exercise was the one he had me do was one designed to get pressure off of my face, because I was that guy. I still have the dent in my face to prove it. I was a pressure player. I think I always have been, and I always fight against it. So these exercises really do help me to prevent that and make sure it stays away. It doesn't come creeping back in. And it's tough at first. So part of the method is that you keep you keep the pressure off and maintain or build up some corner and embouchure structure as you're doing this. So this first exercise that he had me do, he said was very specific about if it really taxes you, do it every other day or every 3 days. It's just designed to kind of start building a little bit of strength. And so you would start just basic on like a C scale, and you would play a scale in steps, and don't lift the mouthpiece off of your face. That's the way that exercise goes. And breathe through your nose or your corners or something like that so that you're never lifting the mouthpiece off. And you start down low. And you work your way up as high as you possibly can until it comes out as squeaks, basically, or it doesn't even come out at all. And it's essentially you're building your high range off of your low range at the same time as you're building embouchure strength in your corners and trying to get some of the pressure off. And that was exceedingly hard for me. And it's still, every time I go back and do this exercise, I feel kind of feeble, because it's always hard. It gets easier, the range gets better, but really kind of keeping pressure off and keeping strength here, yeah, I mean, it's a difficult thing. The other part to this in the next line down, these are just my notes from all my lessons from him, is very much the same as this harmonic series thing he would have me do, except you start building it and making sure that you're not putting pressure or you're not stopping the air or the buzz between the partials. So. I like to use this as a range exercise too, because you're only adding one more partial up each time, and as you get higher and higher, you'll be able to identify with with the right technique where the note crack and the note bumps off to the next, and you'll be able to keep adding notes up into your range without really straining and having to work or pushing, that kind of thing. It takes time. It's not an instant thing, but it really does work very well. So
fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So this is all a part of the flexibility second point, second tip.
Kind of. Yeah.
Awesome.
I guess there's a little bit to it, huh?
Exactly. Okay, how about number 3?
All right, number 3, I usually go with articulation. It's, to me, articulation really separates some really fine playing from spectacular playing. Because with attention to detail and stuff, you can transform what you think sounds great into something that really truly sounds unbeatable or unmatched, or really just sounds fantastic. And it's about attention to detail, a lot of it. So there's no trick to articulation. We all do it. We all know how, but it's really being specific on how things work. So I use a lot of air pattern, and oddly enough, I just do basic exercises. So from my Arvin book or from Coprash, the one that I do every day as part of my warm-up is Coprash number 3, right out of the beginning of the book. And essentially what I focus on here is making sure that all the notes sound the same, and that I'm not getting any variation in how the note sounds initially, or even the length of it or the end of it, based on range. And so I'll take this exercise, and this is part of my warm-up every day. I'm sure my colleagues will laugh at hearing me say that, because they've probably grown really tired of it. But I do find that it works really well. I disregard the allegro. I don't go very fast because I'm focused on actually what's going on. So if I take, and just make sure that all the notes sound like they're articulated the same way, like the initial attack is the same. The shape of the note's all the same. I mean, this is a good aid to kind of figure out how you're going to control the different registers and make sure they all sound even. That being said, I mean, I worked a lot with Perantoni on articulation, and I think a lot of his students find that they are really successful because he demands that they clean things up a little bit, and that they take they take their playing from something that is really good to something that's really spectacular. And a lot of the success I think he has is because of articulation, and because he really demands that these things get cleaned up. So I mean, and I have a tuba player brain, so I find that it's really easy to get myself off the rails sometimes if I think too hard about nuts and bolts of how things work. But essentially, like with these exercises, I go basic because I want to make sure that things are lining up. So my tongue is hitting in the same spot every time, that it's coming back the same way, so that I produce the same kind of sound, and that the airflow is working the way it should. And I actually do a lot of air pattern work with it. I mix some breathing exercises in there too. But, if you were to just do, I don't know how that sounds on the computer, if it sounds like anything, but if you were to just do this exercise without your instrument and just focus on making sure your tongue hits the backside of your teeth, I'm not flipping you off, by the way, right here, and that it loads and then comes straight back, and that it's even all the way through and it's not dependent on where you are in your register, that, I mean, it at least cleans up a little bit, and you're able to get a pretty consistent sound.
Can you show us one more time exactly? I took it off the screen share. Show
Yeah.
us one more time exactly where the tongue hits.
So, okay, good. So I'm not flipping you off again, but I like right in here, like right at the base of my top teeth, almost like I'm sticking it straight through, but not really, so that I get a sound. I don't know if that translates at all on the computer, but and the sound is it's heavy on air. You know, if there's a ratio of air to tongue, you've got way more air than you do tongue. The tongue is, you know, just dividing up what you're playing, and that's it. It's not, you know, getting itself in the way, or it's not creating the sound unless you want it to. But in general, just kind of making it really light.
I think that's definitely something that a lot of younger tuba players struggle with. And I don't know if it's specifically the tongue. I think most of the time it is the tongue, but just clarity in general is, of course, the struggle of all tuba players.
Yeah.
So,
and it's a lot dependent on airflow as well. If you have enough air moving, then things tend to work a little bit better, regardless of what you're going for. So,
fantastic. Yeah, tonguing, clarity, articulation, so important.
Let's do some breathing next, because there's no way around this. I mean, we're tuba players, and you know, Denver is up a mile above sea level, and the air is thinner, and you get sunburned faster, and you can't breathe. And I feel like I'm gonna pass out sometimes when I'm holding out for some really long stuff. It's kind of fun to make my fingers tingle when I'm playing on stage, but not really. So. Yeah, I mean, I also do a lot of breathing exercises, and you know, Toby Hanks was, like I said, an influential person, because he actually was able to, you know, focus on different things because he wasn't playing the instrument at the time. So his approach was really based on sound and what the air sounds like as it's moving in and moving out, and how it works for you, and you know, so. He had me do a lot of breathing exercises, and so I figured I'd share just a couple of them.
Please, please.
So the main part, and I think this is you'll find this similar, just different terminology with, you know, a lot of people. You know, his first thing was breathing through your lips or from your lips. And I know, you know, Mr. Perantoni would say that to us all the time too, and a good breath would come in like you're breathing through like a giant 2-liter size straw, so that there was nothing restricting the airflow in, and then nothing restricting it on the way out, so that whatever you took in, you had available to use. So, you know, he would even have me put my finger up like this so I could hear and feel the air coming through. But for him, a good breath, and it was a sound he was going for, would sound like this. So that it's not quiet, it's not silent, but there's a lot of air coming in and out. The other part, and you know, I even made, like I used to make and still do, just make little notes after all my lessons and of things that I learned. And so I made my own stick figure guy, because his approach was to fill up part 1 first. Here, I'm going to move this down. Part 1, the tone chamber first, and then part 2. So that you get a breath that goes down as far as it possibly could before you just fill up here. So whereas I would normally breathe with a breath just like up in here, he would force me to go down to part 1 first. You could call it whatever you want, Chipotle chamber or tone chamber or whatever, but it gets the point across that, you know, when you expand your lungs, they really do, you know, force the air down instead of being stuck up here. So we put those two things together and create just really basic breathing exercises, you know, stuff, you know, like from breathing gym in 4 and out 4. That's it. You know, that's where you start. Just focusing on sound that the air makes as it's coming in. So you would And once you kind of master that and get the idea that there's no restriction coming in, then the next thing he would add in, and this is the fun part, is using your arm as a gas gauge. So when you're full, you're here, and when you're empty, you're out here. So, you know, when you're breathing and doing exercises, you would say, okay, let's, you know, vary this quite a bit by going in for 2, out for 10, in for 1, out for 4, and, you know, just all over the map. And he would honestly just bark out instructions, and I would have to follow, which was kind of fun. And I would leave those lessons not being able to stand up very well. But they sure did a lot of good. So basically, when I was doing the exercise, the other portion of this is that not only is this a gas gauge, but it represents an air column that comes and fills up your lungs and then goes out into the instrument. So when you're breathing in, you're taking the air column in. And when you're blowing out, you're blowing that same air column out into the instrument, making the sound better, or making the phrase happen, however. And so by the end of doing these breathing exercises, his point was that you should be able to breathe for whatever purpose you need, whether it's fountains and you need all the air that you can possibly get in absolutely no time, or if it was, you know, something like a copres etude or something like that, where you're constantly playing eighth notes and you don't have anywhere to breathe. So his goal was to kind of make you well-rounded as a breather so that you could do both of them. But part of the exercise was, you know, taking this air column or this gas gauge and showing how much air you're getting in during an exercise. So if he would do something varied, he would do so that, you know, when you're taking a little bit of air in, you're only showing a little bit, and you're accurately showing where you are within your tank. You know, are you full? Are you getting up here? Where is it? And how much are you getting back in? So that you can keep the sound of the breath in consistent all the way, regardless if it's a 16th note or 8th note or, you know, a long 4 beats or something like that. That you always get the same breath, it's the same sound, the same, you know, kind of relaxed breathing, just a little portion of it as opposed to a long little bit of it. And so you're always relaxed, and you're never going to be playing along and then go like that because you don't have enough air and you can't get enough in.
Yeah, that's not a really comfortable feeling, or even worse, if you have to take a desperate breath and something gets caught in your throat and disaster.
Yeah.
How long did it take you to get used to playing in Denver?
Yeah. I'm not sure I'm used to it still. You know, it is difficult because the air's thinner. There's a reason they put the Olympic training facility in Colorado Springs, because it does make that much of a difference. I mean, and if anyone has ever been up to Breckenridge to play, or Aspen, it's even worse because the elevation is that much higher. And, you know, you just find you have to make sacrifices, and it requires a little more thought about where I'm going to breathe and, you know, how long it's going to take and how long it's going to last. So, you know, I definitely don't play always the way that I hope that I can. You know, there are some sacrifices that I have to make, but they're not terrible, you know, and they're manageable, I'll say that. And every time I go to sea level, I feel great.
Sure.
And I sometimes end up with a little too much air and have an opposite problem because of it. But it's a good training facility, I'll say that. It's not great for performing, but it's good for training. So we'll go with intonation as my last little, not little point, but big point. Because I mean, look, I need to provide some kind of solid foundation for the rest of the orchestra. or at least try to match the basses or match the contrabassoon, that kind of thing, and or cellos. And you know, if I'm fishing for my pitch, it certainly makes everyone else's job a little more difficult. So like I focus a lot on pitch, somewhat successfully, somewhat unsuccessfully, you know, but you know, in college, my roommate and I did this series called the Perfect Pitch Series, and it was this course on CDs designed to, you know, give yourself perfect pitch, which, you know, is not possible. But we certainly did a lot of pitch work on those recordings, on the CDs, and we developed pretty good relative pitch as a result, but not perfect pitch. You know, I couldn't tell you what note anything is. So, you know, what I do is I focus a lot on just playing with drones, not so much playing with a tuner. You know, you can have a snark on your instrument or sit with a tuner on your stand and still be out of tune. You know, and it's not a bad tool, particularly if you don't ever play with a tuner. Well, then it's probably a good idea to do it. But I like the drone better because it really forces your ear to do the work. And so, you know, instead of just playing scales with a drone, which is all well and good, I just get bored with it. I like to find different etudes and exercises. So, I mean, there's a whole range of stuff. You basically just have to find something that's in one key, you know, so that you can tune to it. So I like Blasevich etudes. The first 4 of them really are really good for that. There's stuff out of the Potag horn collection book. Actually, there's that one etude that was on the Arnold Jacobs CD, The Portrait of an Artist, that works really well if you set a drone and you play that etude along with it on one of his practice recordings. But the things that I like most are the Gallet preludes. This is Gallet number 26. I mean, there's a whole section of this book that is unmetered preludes. So think of them as just long cadenzas that you work out on your own. And these happen to work really well for playing with a drone pitch. I like the unmetered ones because you have a lot more flexibility. And if you have to stop to fine tune a note or two or all of them, you're not really interrupting the flow so much of the music. So you actually still get some music out of it as you're doing your work. So I'll just play the first line, and then I'll put the drone on and I'll show you what I do. So on its own, it's very musical. So. All right, so then, you know, if I'm working on this thing, I'm going to put my metronome, or sorry, my drone pitch, which I have the old Dr. Beat, I still haven't graduated. I'll put it on an E, and I'll play along with it. And sorry, if any of the notes don't line up, I'll actually stop and fix them. Right, and so I'll take a little bit of time to actually fix the note, and then hopefully over time you come back and it's in the spot where it's supposed to be. There are preludes almost for every key, which is great. There's one in F, there's one in C, G, A, B flat. Some of the best ones are the F sharp ones and the B natural, because they force you to play in these keys that we just don't like, and make sure that you're actually tuning and playing appropriately. So I do a lot of that as much as I can withstand, and as much as my family can withstand playing. And I mean, it really does help solidify things. a little bit better, I think, than just playing with a tuner understand.
Excellent. So I'm assuming that you're listening for all of the different intervals and their relationship to the drum.
Right. So if you're like, we're just in E, if I get to a B and it's not in tune, then I know, okay, on my sharp or flat, it's an open interval. But then again, if I get to a G sharp and then I know, okay, well, it's a third of the pitch, so I get a third of the chord, so I got to lower it. And that way you're learning relation on where the pitch lies within each key. Not that we ever really, as you know, as an orchestral tuba player, I don't really ever play anything except the root. But it's helpful to know that if I end up on a third or something like that, then I know exactly where I should be putting it.
Right. So I've actually thought a lot about this over the past few years about playing with drones. So my question is, what do you do when you're not playing tonal music?
Well, I don't know. Do you pick, the question would be, do you pick a reference pitch, you know, that seems kind of relevant and go off of that? Or do you just then go off more interval work? Which, I mean, look, we all took sight singing year training in college. Mine was at a miserable 8 o'clock time, you know, and it was awful. But, you know, somehow when you're not totally awake, you actually learn what you're doing, I suppose, and it's more ingrained. So, you know, not that you couldn't do some drone work, but if it's more interval based, then you go off the intervals and making sure that those are maybe correct. And then you come back and, you know, return, if there's a pitch you return to, you know, figure out that's your baseline or something like that. Yeah.
So either way, you're challenging the ear and you're not just relying on a needle to tell you whether you're playing in tune or not.
I mean, I'm constantly a student still. You know, I've been here 15 years playing in the orchestra, and I mean, pitch is always fluid. It's always changing. So even if I go in and say, okay, I'm going to lay my pitch down right here, you know, A equals 441, my pitch is right here. If everyone else is disagreeing with that, then I have no choice. You know, I have to adjust, and I have to adjust immediately. Otherwise, I'm the bad guy, you know? So, you know, I'm always learning, you know, where my pitch is, where my slide should be to make things easier. I can always adjust here if I need to. But things are constantly fluctuating. So, you know, it's like your training class every day.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I guess that's a really, really good way to think about it. And it's certainly refreshing to hear how you, as a very accomplished professional, is constantly challenging yourself and remaining in the student mindset. So fantastic.
Well, that's the goal. If our 3-year-old keeps us up, sometimes the challenge is just staying awake. But you know, at least that's my goal.
So, Steve, this has been an incredible session. I know that this is going to be helpful to many, many, many people. It's certainly going to be very helpful to me. I can't wait to get in the practice room and start to implement some of the stuff in my daily routine. So I do have one question in closing here, which is, if you could only do one of these things, which would you do? If you had to boil it down to one thing that you would practice, what would it be?
One thing that I would practice? Well, I probably would just play music, honestly. Whatever form that takes, whether it's, you know, some of the intonation ones or whatever. I mean, all those different exercises. Whatever one I was feeling like, if there was one particular one that felt like music that day, that's what I would play. You know, like, I mean, we're in quarantine now, and it can get monotonous and frustrating. Music has always been my outsourcing. It's always been where I found some inspiration, or even blew off some steam, or got a little bit of inspiration back in. So yeah, all these things, all these fundamental things really just go to aid my tuba playing so that I'm playing as well as I can. But my goal is always to make some music. And feel like whatever I'm playing feeds my soul or feeds someone else's soul. That's the whole point. And, you know, so if today it feels like, you know, the Arban exercise is going to do that, well, that's what I'm going to play. Or if it's just a breathing exercise that'll take care of it, then great. I don't even have to take my tuba out. But you know, that's the focus. Always on making some kind of music. You know, making it the art form that it is.
Thank you so much. Fantastic.